Deploy Databricks jobs smoothly with an automated Azure DevOps release pipelines. So this is the topic for today, and this is part 2 of the series of sessions for Databricks and Azure DevOps. And part first is already there in the YouTube, and this is a part 2 where we are going to discuss about how do we develop and deploy the release pipelines in Azure DevOps for Databricks projects. So let's get started. Hello friends, welcome to my channel and explore the world of Microsoft Azure. My name is Rajneesh Kaushik and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, consultant and an enterprise architect. For more latest videos and blogs, you can always log into my website rajneeshkaushik.com and subscribe to my blog. Please do not forget to subscribe my channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss the latest videos. Do like, share and comment. So let's discover the agenda for today's session. Deploying Databricks jobs smoothly with an automated Azure DevOps and release pipeline. So first we are going to define the release pipeline. In order to do that, we first going to create an empty job template and then add the artifacts coming from the build pipeline and enable the continuous deployment trigger so that as and when the build pipeline is successfully triggered, the release pipeline can be triggered. Then we will define the environment variables for the release pipeline so that these environment variables, they are nothing but your Databricks related environment variable. Then we will configure the release agent and then we are going to unpack the build artifact coming from the build pipeline, install the Databricks related CLI command, CLI binaries, and then unit test related XML reporting related, Python scripts. Then we will deploy the notebook to the workspace, and as well as we will copy the Python wheel coming from the build pipeline to the workspace. And finally, we will install the Python wheel to the cluster and create the integration test directory so that the test results can be saved into the respective directories. Then we will run the notebook, and after running the notebook, we will create and evaluate the notebook test results. And then after evaluating the test result, we will evaluate the notebook result and publish these results. And finally, I will show you a quick demo about end-to-end execution of this pipeline. So let's get started. Okay, so the first and foremost is we are going to define the release pipeline. For release pipeline, we need to go to the pipeline, and here you need to select the release and create a release pipeline. Second, once the release pipeline is created, it's going to ask you the which project type you want to use. So in our case, we are going to use the empty project type. Why empty project type? Because we want to configure this, with the scratch. So this is going to be the empty project type. Then we are going to add the artifacts, and these artifacts are nothing but the artifact which we have published in the build pipeline, right? And those artifacts will be coming here. So we need to select these artifacts from this particular folder. So when you go to here, select the project and then the version latest, and then automatically it will give you an option to go to the particular folder, and it will come here with the particular folder from where the artifacts are coming. So which means that artifacts are dumped here and these artifacts are available here. Enable continuous deployment trigger. So we need to enable this trigger so that as and when the build pipeline is successful, the continuous delivery pipeline will be activated. So as and when somebody successfully deploys the code or the code is built successfully, this pipeline will be automatically started. Then we need to define the environment variable for the release pipeline, because these environment variables will be used by the release pipeline to deploy the code into the cluster. So it requires your Databricks token, which you can go in the Databricks workspace and go to the user tab and create a token. It also needs a Databricks host, which is nothing but your workspace URL, and then cluster ID. When you create a cluster, it shows the cluster ID, and that cluster ID is coming here. So these are the different variables which is required for this pipeline to be successfully running. Then we will configure the release agent. In the release agent is nothing but your Ubuntu VM, and as I told you in the last session, that this VM specific version is very much required, because this version is dependent upon your Databricks cluster version which you are using. So in this case we are using Ubuntu 20.04, right? And release agent is the machine where all your release related jobs will be running. So this is very important to select this version correctly. Otherwise, whatever version you are selecting here and it is not going to match in the Databricks, you will not be able to run the release pipeline correctly. Now the next step is set the Python version for the release agent. So this is again very important, because your Python version should match with the Python version supported by the Databricks cluster. So in this case we are using Python 3.8, and this is a simple script where you can use the Python 3.8 version, and it's ready to run the code in the Python 3.8. Then the next step would be unpack the build artifact. You remember that we created a build artifacts, and those build artifacts were created in a zip file as a last step, and now we are going to extract this zip file and then start using that extracted material from the zip file, and this is a destination folder where all the zip file will be extracted into. Then the next step will be to deploy or install the Databricks CLI and the unit test XML reporting. Why this is important? Because we need to install the Databricks CLI and unit test XML reporting package. Why? Because we are going to call this Databricks with the Databricks CLI, and whatever the unit test results are coming, it is coming in the XML. So this particular library is required for that, because this library will be required for reporting the unit test results to the in the agent, via the agent. So this is very much okay. So now we are going to deploy the notebook to the workspace, and as you know that somebody as a developer already checked in the code into the GitHub, and that GitHub code will be deployed into the workspace. So how do we deploy it? Actually, this is nothing but a Databricks CLI command, Databricks workspace import, and in that we are actually specifying the path, and this path is nothing but the system.artifact directory. System.artifact directory is the directory where wherefrom you have downloaded your artifacts, which is coming from the build pipeline, and this is the part where the artifacts were pushed in the build pipeline, and now you are going to use this to get the value from the artifacts and use this in the CLI command. And the CLI command is nothing but it is importing the import from the workspace, and whatever is coming from that, it is going to use that. So it is actually copying this notebook, whatever coming from the build pipeline, and it is copying it into the workspace. That means it is importing these notebooks into the workspace. It is exactly same when you import a new notebook from outside. So you go to workspace and then click import. So now we are using this CLI command to exactly achieve the same. Then the next step would be copy the Python wheel to the workspace. So now as you know that we have created Python wheel libraries in our last build command. Now we are going to deploy this Python library to the DBFS location. Okay, and this DBFS location we are going to use in the next subsequent command. So this is the command where we are going to Databricks FSCP, that means copying it, and if it is already there then it's going to overwrite it, and this is what it is trying to copy the wheel library right into this particular DBFS location. So this is a DBFS location where you are copying it from the artifact directory to this particular DBFS location. Now the next step would be install Python wheel library to the cluster. So now you already have the Python wheel library which is there in the DBFS location. Now as a next step, what you are going to do, you are going to install this Python wheel library from the DBFS location to your cluster, because cluster is where your all the libraries will be running from. So for this, what you are going to do, you are going to install this library, and then you are going to use a very specific script which is called install vlibrary.py, and this script will do the magic for you, which means it is going to deploy the vlibrary to the cluster. And this script requires these arguments, which means it requires a Databricks token. Obviously this script will need to connect to Databricks, so it requires a token to connect. It also requires to know the Databricks host where your Python wheel will go, so it need to know that. It also needs to know the cluster ID because it need to deploy it into the cluster, and then it also needs to know the library path and then DBFS location. So these are the things it need to know so that it can deploy the Python wheel into the cluster. So let's understand this Python script step by step. So let's understand this Python script which does the magic. So this is a very simple Python script. It imports couple of important Python libraries, right? And here it is actually, this part of the script does actually creates a arguments and try to check whether these arguments are coming from the script from outside. If these arguments are not defined, then it is going to throw the error, and it is also going to tell you that this is the way you need to run this script, right? And it is also, when you run this script, it is going to send all these, print these details like token, cluster ID, lib path, DBFS path, and other stuff. So this is simple, very straightforward. Then at this point of time, it is going to generate the list of files from the local path. So it's going to go to the local path and find out the list of files, and it is going to add this list of files, right? And then here it's going to evaluate whether this particular library should be installed or uninstalled or reinstalled, right? So for this, it's going to get the library status on that cluster, and if it finds that the library is not found, okay, then it is going to install. If it is found, then it's not going to install. So these are the it's going to do that couple of things, like whether first it is going to find out if it is installed or not. If it is installed, then it is going, if it is not installed, then it is going to install it, and then it is also going to restart the cluster, right? And after restarting the cluster, it's going to really install this library. So these are the commands. It's a helper. Install lib is a helper, uninstall lib is another helper, install lib is used, so it's a standard logic for installing the library. Then these are the methods which is being used here in this particular part, like restart cluster, uninstall lib, and then install lib is another one. This is install lib. So it's very simple, install lib, and then finally getting the status of the library, right? So if no library found, then it is saying no found, not found. And so this is a main part of the code which does the main job for you. It's going to find it out. If the status is not, it is none, then it is going to give you the status, and if it is not found, then it is going to install, and if it is found, then it is going to uninstall it and then restart the cluster and then install it. So this is the fundamental logic of it. Okay, so now we are going to create an integration test directories. So integration test directories are used when you are going to run the unit test. That time you are going to create a log. Databricks will create a log, and those logs will be coming as a JSON, and this is where you are going to create a directories, test directories. So these directories will be used in the subsequent section. So what it is doing, it is actually creating a directory with memkdir in the Linux, and it is installing the PyTest and request, and these are the libraries which it is installing. Then this is very, very important part. In this part, we are going to run the notebook, and in order for us to run the notebook, we have created a execute notebook .python script. This script is actually created when you build the pipeline. At that point of pipeline, the build pipeline itself, this script was already there, and this script, nobody touches this script. It is there the way it is. Okay, this script is the core part of the notebook, which, so whenever you run this script, this script actually runs this notebook, And how this script runs the notebook, it is actually running it by submitting a job in the endpoint. So when you run a job on the endpoint, it actually creates an anonymous job, and once the job is running, it tries to find out the job status by the REST API. Okay, so and find it out whether the job ran successfully or not. So if the job is successfully run, then it is going to give you the JSON result, and that JSON result will be found it out from the REST API call, which, and for that only we have created this JSON folder, right? You can see JSON and XML folder. So this notebook is actually located in the Databricks/CI/CD script in the execute notebook.python, and it again require the Databricks specific environment variable to call, and then it also require the notebook location where the notebook will be running from. And then, as you know, the notebook is running from this Databricks notebooks/notebooks, and then it is going to give you the output in the Databricks logs/JSON, so that you can query this output and find it out how this particular part is running. So let's pause and see where we have created this script in the GitHub. So you can see that all our helper scripts are kept in the CI/CD script. So this is the important CI/CD script with execute notebook.py, and actually this is the one we were looking at, execute notebook py, and this is the script where we have kept it, execute notebook. Similarly, we saw that install will library notebook, and then similarly we will also use evaluate notebook run. And if you go further inside it, you will also find that notebooks are kept here, and in this example notebook is kept here with this name. Okay, so now let's understand the code behind this notebook. And again, the way we have understood install library code, similarly this code is also very easy to understand. The first part of the code is that it imports the important libraries, and then the second part is that it's going to actually check whether the arguments are passed correctly or not. If it is not passed, then it is going to tell you that arguments are not passed with the exception, and after that it's going to display all the arguments like your token, cluster, local path, workspace path, and output file path, and other details, right? So this is what it's going to do. Now after this, it's going to actually generate the list of notebooks from the walking the local path. So whatever the local path was there, it's going to find out the list of notebooks which is kept there. So this is what it is to go inside that path and find it out. Then it is going to run each notebook in the list, because it's going to create a notebook list, and in that notebook list, which is here, it's going to go through each notebook and then find out the name and then workspace path, right? And then after that it removes the extension, and then it will add it again so that it can get the full workspace path. Then it is going to run the job, and while running the job, it's going to create the cluster ID based on the cluster ID, and then it's going to create this job create a job, and for that job it's going to use the API call from the request Python library. It's going to create a API call, and this API call will go into this endpoint and create a job, and then it is going to submit this job with the REST API, and whatever is data which is sent back, it's going to come here as a JSON file, and this JSON file will be actually used, and it is going to be loaded into the JSON path. So then after that it's going to wait, and it is keep on waiting, and based on that job ID which is kept here, it's going to find out the that job ID, what is the status of that job ID which is submitted in this part, and then find it out what is the outcome of that job ID, if it is successful or whatever it is the status. So then after that it is going to it is going to print it as a JSON file and load this JSON file right in the job JSON, and then it's trying to find out the status. Okay, so it's going to find the status. If status is terminated or internal error skipped, then it's going to take this action, it's going to break it, otherwise it's going to dump the value, and this is what it shows. It's going to create an output. That output will go into the JSON folder, and create a JSON dump inside that and close that stream. So this is very straightforward, and you don't have to worry even if you don't understand it, because you can directly use this script the way it is, right? Because this is a helper script, you don't have to recreate this script, it is already there, so you can just use this script. Now as a next step, you have already ran that notebook, and then you also have ran the test on the notebook. So there are, those test results are actually captured in this. There is a specific path where these test results are captured. So for that test result to run, we are going to create or run another script called evaluate notebook runs Python. And there is this particular script will be very important, and we will learn the script, how does it work and how does it evaluate the results. So let's understand this. Again, this is very straightforward script. It's going to use these libraries, XML runner, and these are the plugins which is being used. This from this, it's going to import a couple of libraries, and then after that it is going to test job result output. So this test job result output, it has multiple functions: helper function, test performance, test job run, right? And similarly it provides multiple functions like that, right? So what it is doing is actually it is running the unit test, okay, and then based on that it is going to give you the output, and that output will go into the particular folder. So if you see this particular path here, right, I have given you path to JSON logs on release agent. So this path to JSON log on release agent will be a particular path in the VSTS, okay, based on your GitHub alias. And this is how this whole path will come here when you are going to use this. So so this is what how it's going. So if let me show you this path for me so that it becomes very clear for you. So this is the path which I was referring to: home, VSTS, work, and then this is my GitHub name, GitHub repo name, and then this is the path, Databricks log.json. So now you have already ran the test and evaluation is done from the test. Now the next step would be to publish these test results, right? And this is how the publish test result works, where it is going to find out the test result files, and it's going to search into this folder and publish the test result. So now what we are going to do, we are going to test end-to-end execution of this release pipeline and build pipeline, so that I can showcase this whole concept end-to-end. So let's get started and jump to a demo. Okay, so this is my DevOps environment, and in that I'll show you the release pipeline. This is my release pipeline, and the name of the release pipeline, I have just kept it new release pipeline, but this is how it's going to look like. So let me show you the whole all these tasks. So if you remember that we have done the enable continuous deployment trigger enabled, this is the empty job, and this is where the artifacts are kept, right? So this is one, and then in the stages I have created these stages. For first stage is using the Python version, extract the build pipeline artifacts, install the Databricks CLI and XML reporting libraries, copy the notebook to the workspace, copy the Python wheel to the workspace, and then all these things we already saw it in the slides, right? Install Python wheel on library. This is another install wheel library.py. We saw the overall code of it. Create integration test directory. This is the directory where you are going to get the result of the Databricks API call as well as to the test results. This is a notebook running code which actually runs the notebook, and then this is the test result where the test results are coming from the unit test, and finally it is publishing it to the this one. So now let's see, let's run it the release pipeline and see how does it look like. So I'm going to say create a release, create. So you can see that the moment you created a release, it started running the job, and these are the stages of the job where it is running. It's going through one by one all the steps, and it will show you whether all the steps are successful or failed. And obviously at this point of time I'm actually running it with the release job, but you can run it from the build job itself to trigger it end to end. So you saw that the release is failed. Why? Because I have actually entered the wrong cluster name. And why? Because initially when I created this pipeline, the cluster name was different, but then I deleted that cluster. So when I recreated the cluster, the new cluster did not have the same ID. So I have now updated the cluster ID. How do we update it? Just go to edit, and then here if you go to stages, then you will find the variables. In that variable you will find this Databricks host, token and cluster. So my cluster ID was wrong, but now I have corrected it. So I'm going to now run the cluster. Another important part is you need to run the cluster, and once the cluster is running, then only you need to run this job. Otherwise this job is going to fail it. Okay, so now I have already updated the variables. I'm going to again create a new release. So release is already created, and you can see that it is still running. So initialization of job is already started. So now you can see that all the jobs are running successfully, and my agent job is finished. And you can see the same thing in the succeeded. And even if you go to the release option, it says that it is successfully done. Now if you see the library is installed, you can see that this library is already installed. So if you come here in the workspace, you can see that this notebook is also created in the shared workspace, and the whole code of unit testing is also there. This is the same notebook which we have created. So this notebook also ran successfully, and which means that our job is ran successfully. You can also see this job here, it ran successfully, and these are the successful results from the job. You can also see that test tab, the results. So there are two tests passed, 0 failed, and how much time it took, which means that our pipeline is successfully initiated. Now I will also show you one more option where we are going to trigger this pipeline from the deploy, and then it will automatically trigger the build from build to a release pipeline. So here I am again on the build pipeline. I am going to run this pipeline now. And obviously I can run it from here, or whenever I check in the code, this same pipeline will run. So anyway I can use that. So I'm running it. So this pipeline already started running. Now you can see that the build pipeline is successfully ran, and let's go to the release pipeline. And you can see that this build pipeline automatically triggered the release pipeline, release number 6. And this release pipeline is now running. So which means that the build and release pipeline are connected, and the trigger, the enable continuous deployment trigger, right, that is working fine for us. Similarly, if I want to come here and then commit some code here, that will also, like I have just added one file here in the commit, and I'm committing the change. And when I say committing the change, it automatically trigger a pipeline here for you. And let's see. So it will come here. So I'm going to commit the changes in the Git, and let's see how this pipeline runs from that commit. You can see that last release pipeline is successfully completed. So now you can see that I have actually committed a code here, new commit for testing, just for the readme file, and it automatically created a build pipeline for me, and this build pipeline is starting here, and this build pipeline will automatically trigger all the jobs, and then if you see it carefully, it will go back, it will trigger the release pipeline as well. So let's see that. So it ran that job successfully, and now let's go to the releases. Release is also done. It's still progressing. It is queued. So this release will also be completed the way I have shown you. So this is how you can implement end-to-end DevOps for Azure DevOps and Databricks, where you can not just deploy the notebook but also deploys the libraries, Python unit testing framework to test your code for doing the unit testing, and deploy the end-to-end, CI/CD pipelines. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to subscribe and hit the bell